Today we continue to look closely at forgiveness and forgiving others. In Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 35, Jesus told a story that illustrates why we must forgive. It's a story about debt, money debt, and a man who owed a great deal of money. But this story perfectly describes why we must forgive our debtors, the people who have sinned and hurt us. It's called the parable of the unmerciful servant, and it begins with one of Jesus's friends, Peter, asking him a question. Let's hear what this question is. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sinned against me? Up to 7 times?" Jesus answered, "I tell you not 7 times, but 77 times. When I read this verse, I think of Peter sitting in the back seat of the car with his siblings, and Jesus is up front driving. Peter's brother or sister is driving him crazy. He keeps making faces at him, taking his belongings, poking at his arm, and Peter is doing his very best to just hold it all together. You know what I mean? But finally, he is so fed up. He does what we all do when we're pushed to our limit. He yells, "Mom!" Or in this case, "Jesus!" And then Jesus turns around and says, "Yes, Peter?" And Peter launches into wondering how many times he has to forgive this other backseat dweller. At what point is it okay for him to be mean back? When is it okay for him to snap and lose it or just write this person off? And Jesus says, just keep forgiving him. You can't stop. And I don't want to hear it again. Peter wants to know how many times he has to forgive someone. And Jesus is like, "Peter, really? Just always do it." But Jesus doesn't stop there. He goes into a full-fledged story to try to explain why he is saying what he is saying. Let's continue our reading at verse 23. "Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. 'Be patient with me,' he begged, 'and I will pay back everything.' The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. 'Pay back what you owe,' he demanded. His fellow servant to his knees fell and begged him, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay it back.' But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged, and they told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. 'You wicked servant,' he said. 'I canceled all that debt of yours because you had begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had on you?' In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he could pay back all that he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart." So the master who had forgiven the first servant's debt was so angry that the servant hadn't extended the same mercy to the other servant that he threw the servant into jail. This servant's unforgiveness was literally a jail for him. And Jesus says that's what it's like for us too. We are all that first servant who is forgiven a huge debt by the Lord. When Jesus died on the cross, he forgave that debt for us. And now we have a choice to make. We have all been shown forgiveness, so we have to choose what we want to do with others. None of us will make it out of this world without being sinned against. We will all have painful things happen to us, and there will be people who will hurt us, whether intentionally or not. And we have to decide, how do we want to react? Do we want to show the same forgiveness and mercy to those who hurt us as the king showed the first servant? Or do we want to treat others the way the servant treated the servant below him? Jesus forgave us, and he wants us to extend that same forgiveness to others too. I pray that today, each of our hearts will be opened a little more to forgiveness.